y'all doing? Good. Okay. Well, try to keep you awake. I know it's after lunch. I'm super excited to do this panel with two amazing speakers, Gagan Biyani, who's co-founder and CEO of Maven, and Sara Mauskopf, co-founder and CEO of Winnie. I've known them both for a very long time. They're experienced entrepreneurs. They've seen a lot. They have, done a lot. And I think on a hot topic like how to pivot or how to think about pivots, that's something that I think we're going to have a pretty lively discussion about. So let's go ahead and dig in. I think my first question to you both is very high level. Like, when something is going wrong in your startup, and more often than not it is, how do you know whether to stay the course or think about a pivot? Like, what is sort of a thinking process or framework? And then we'll dig in from there.
My favorite thing about product market fit is to describe it as an orgasm. Like, you don't necessarily know when you don't have it, but you definitely know when you have it. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so hard to know when to pivot is you just don't really know that you don't have product market fit when you're in it. And you think oh, if I just do this one thing, or if I try this other thing, or I just need this one feature, it'll finally work and we'll get there and we'll get that growth. But it is really hard to know, and we spent way too long doing the wrong thing before we pivoted into a childcare marketplace, spoiler alert. And then it finally started working, and you just want to hate yourself and be like, damn, why didn't I think of that sooner? But it's so hard to know. So don't beat yourself up if you don't know.
And we'll dig into that in a second. Gagan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible to know in the moment. And so the thing you first have to recognize is that it's a total spectrum in my mind. And you can have product market fit the way I was at Lyft for a couple months and I saw their product market fit. I have never in my career experienced product market fit at the level that Lyft and Uber had. Airbnb might be similar. And then you can have no product market fit and everything in between. And so the question really is whether or not you have enough product market fit to get to the goals that you have for this company, and whether or not you think you'd be better off with an alternative. And I find you just kind of have to give it a college try. You have an idea, you start working on it. You have to give it long enough to feel like you've really exhausted this and understand why it either still has the chance for success or why it doesn't have any more chance for success. And once you get to that point of understanding, then you make a decision and you change. And honestly, I've seen times where companies have pivoted and then another company gets into their space and is successful. So oftentimes it's personal to the founding team, and so it's not a very easy thing to do.
So you both have alluded to time, like giving something enough time, and you also even mentioned doing something for too long before changing course. How do you know what is the right amount of time? And do you put a number on it? Like if it doesn't work in 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is, do you move on, or how do you think about that?
I think a really good limiting factor is money. Back when I started Winnie in 2016, there was a lot of money flowing around. And so we raised money and we were building this thing that didn't make any money. It had no monetization model whatsoever. And so it was really easy to trick ourselves into thinking, we just need to give it a little more time, and get these metrics, and then we can raise the next round. But when the funding landscape shifted and we decided to become a profitable business, I think that's really helped clarify what is working and what isn't. Right now, I can just see, are we profitable? Okay, then it's working. If we're not, then, oh shit, we better figure something out or have a plan to get there. So I always tell founders, it's actually sometimes a good thing if you can't raise a lot of money, because it is, it forces you to be real about what is and isn't working and to develop a business model sooner rather than later.
And before we go to Gagan, I want to double click on this. So tell everybody what you were working on before for, quote, too long, and before you shifted.
So Winnie initially was like a platform to help parents find things to do with their kids. So we launched this app and it was free and it would like list like fun places to go with your kids or like family-friendly restaurants. And people didn't hate it because it was a free app and like you're not gonna hate on something that's free. But they also didn't really use it that much either. And so we were in this like kind of like zombie land of like, well, maybe it's working if this feature is working. Meanwhile, it was actually my co-founder, so I take credit, but it was really all her, that one weekend like built a website to find daycare and preschool in San Francisco and launched it in a mother's group. And suddenly that started working, and we kind of saw that insight because people were searching for childcare in our app. And we were like, okay, great, this is the feature we should build in. We should build in childcare. And so we did that for a while, and we were like working on basically two things at the same time before we were like, this is stupid. Like, we have a business that's working that people will pay us for. We should really just do the childcare thing and kill all the other stuff. But that was also painful because it was my idea, and like I had to admit my idea was dumb and her thing was right. So that was hard for me. But once I got over myself, the business started working, which was good.
And we'll
Just
talk more about the
curious.
psychological aspect. But go ahead. Okay.
Just curious, how long, can you give us like the time horizon of the like parents, the app for what people can do with their kids, then the time horizon of doing both, and then the time horizon of after that?
Yeah, I feel like it was like maybe a year and a half of like just doing the things to do with your kids, and then like definitely over a year of trying to balance both. And so it ended up being over 2 years before we were like, no, this other stuff is dumb. We should just kill it.
And Gagan, you had mentioned something similar in your journey with Maven, like in terms of figuring out who the ICP is and whatnot. How do you think about pivots, like how much time you should give things, et cetera?
Yeah, it's so hard, but it's funny because we also spent about 2 years, I'd say, on the wrong ICP. And I think every business just has different cycles of how long it takes to get feedback. So if you're an enterprise SaaS business, it's going to take you a year or two of just trying to pitch your business to people before you'll even get 1 or 2 customers. And that means that likely you're going to spend 3 to 4 years, like I'm just guessing, I'm not an enterprise SaaS founder, but 3 to 4 years potentially getting through 1 or 2 cycles of iteration to figure out if it works. In my business, so Maven is a marketplace where professionals teach courses to the public on subjects that they know. So for example, today, AI productivity, building AI apps, using Cursor, those are the kinds of things that we teach. And our experts are, doing this live. And so because they're doing it live, they only have the time to do it once every 3 months, typically. And so what that means is that Maven cycles of iteration take 3 to 6 months before we get data on anything we do. So if we do something today, it's going to take 3 months for our first set of instructors to adopt it. It's going to take another 3 months for the second set of instructors to adopt it after we've iterated a little bit. And so it'll be 6 months total before we get any good, solid feedback on what's going on. In consumer apps, it can be like a week, right? So it can be very different depending on the business. And so for us, it took us 2 years because we had to go through 3 or 4 cycles and of those 6-month cycles. And then of course we needed the first 6 months to build the app, right? So I think the cycle time is very related to the market and the customer base.
And like Sarah, can you give us a sense of the timeline? Like, okay, you were on the wrong track for this amount of time. You had an overlap of different customer personas for this amount of time, and then you finally switched over for this amount of time.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So Maven started as a marketplace for creators who have big online audiences and followings to teach the public what they know. It's very, very similar to what we do today, but the big difference is the ICP. So we spent almost 2 years and we raised half of our financing round from our target ICP. Big names like Sean Puri or Legion or Anthony Pompliano. So these people have like hundreds of thousands or millions of followers. Some of them are in startups and tech, but a lot of their followers are just generic online internet people, if you will, in business, right? And it took us almost 2 years of trying to work with that ICP and failing. And actually, if you look at our 2-year retention curve, you know, and we do it by revenue. So if an instructor makes, if our total instructors made $4 million in their first year, our retention in the second year was about 60%. Not bad. But in the third year, it was 4%. So if you look at that first cohort of instructors, it took us 2 years to realize, oh shit, this is going really badly. Like, these people do not want to continue to use our product. And during that time, luckily, we had a second experiment going on, which is we always had the vision that anybody or a significantly larger audience would be able to teach on Maven. And so about a year and a half, 2 years in, we started to look at that audience and say, well, they seem so similar to our creators. Like, what's the difference? And we really figured out that the difference was these were people who had spent 10 to 20 years in industry and viewed teaching as a natural extension of like doing their day job, right? So they worked 15 years at a place like, well, you can't have worked 15 years just at Mercury, but it'd be one of the places that they'd have worked at, or at Notion, or Figma, or something like that. And then they decided to become a creator. It's a very different mentality than someone who basically became a creator, and that is their claim to fame. And so now we have a different ICP, and we started to build the business. And I think 2 years later, our retention rates are closer to, our 2-year retention rate would be something like 180%, so from 4%, right? So it's a massive change.
Oh, great.
Wow.
And, Sarah, you had started talking about some of the, I guess, the psychological impact, right? Like, your team has worked so hard on whatever this initial version is, and at some point there's this realization that actually we're going to dump all of that. How do you message that to your team? You also mentioned that it was your idea. Like, how do you kind of go through that process, both yourself and also with your teammates?
Yeah, I think that messaging to the team was the easiest because people working on something can feel when it's not working, and they're like waiting for you to realize it's not working. Like, they're making a paycheck from you, so they don't want to tell you that your idea sucks. But at the same time, like, they know they're not idiots. So messaging to the team was like everyone was relieved. Like, oh, great, we can finally kill this thing that we've just been hanging on to that no one uses. Messaging to investors was harder because they don't really see the day-to-day of the company, and some of them invested on the original idea or like their spin on the original idea. And so when you tell them like, no, we're doing this other thing, they're like, what? Like, no, we really like the first thing. So that was a little more challenging. And then users, well, we didn't really have a lot of them really passionately using the other thing. There were like 10, so that was fine. But I would say like investors is the hardest, but also at the end of the day, doesn't really matter if they're on board or not. Sorry. You already got their money, so it's really just about like the subsequent funding that they may or may not give you.
Gagan, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. The teams usually, like, they're seeing the same data, they're dealing with the same problems, and if you're running the team well, you're talking about the problems out loud. You're saying, hey, we don't have great retention, like, this instructor, in our case, this instructor quit, that other instructor quit. Like, we're tracking all the data, so by the time you get there, I was probably one of the last people in the company to, like, move us in a new direction, in part because from my perspective, it's quite a definitive move. When you make a move like that, you want to be sufficiently deliberate that you've given it enough time, but also not so deliberate that it takes all your runway away. And similarly, I'd say like, I think as you get further along in your entrepreneurial journey, you realize just how unimportant investors are as a stakeholder for you. Because, and no, I don't even mind defending you because I would imagine that you would agree. I mean, I've talked to plenty of investors. I invest myself. I mean, the reality is that like investors matter in that 6-month period during which you are fundraising. And all that matters is how good your business looks in that 6-month period. And of course, it needs to look, you need to be able to look back and say the business has a trajectory or a story. But in between, they just don't know enough and don't matter. So they're a read-only partner in your decision making. You give them information and hopefully they do something with it, like you ask them for intros to certain types of companies or whatever. But personally, I mean, I basically only talk to my investors when I feel like I need something from them. or if just for fun, but.
Well, I would hope your investors are aligned with your, with your pivots, because presumably there is a reason that you're doing the pivot, right? And ultimately, at the end of the day, they are investing in your leadership and judgment. But along those lines, it isn't always clear once you do a pivot that it is going to work. And you guys kind of alluded to this interim period where you're kind of running 2 different businesses or something. I think that there's some psychology to manage with your team as well, where, okay, the first thing may not have been working and everyone sees that, but how do you know when the second thing is working? Like, what is enough data on the second thing?
Yeah, I mean, for us, because we ran them sort of side by side for way too long, the data was pulling us in that direction. And actually, a lot of our investors were on board really from the start. I remember in one board meeting, like one of the investors early on was like, you should really just get rid of the other stuff and just do this one thing that's working. And I was like, I hate that investor. I can't believe she said that. And she was right. And now I like remind her of that all the time. And she doesn't gloat about it. But, most of them actually saw it too. And so I think the biggest thing was just being honest about what the new kind of milestones were. Like, okay, now we're kind of starting from scratch, and so it's going to take, now this long to build the new business, and we spent all this time working on the wrong thing, so that really isn't time we get to count towards this new thing. Now Winnie has been around for 9.5 years, and a lot of people are like, okay, when are you IPOing? And it's like, well, actually, we're a lot younger than that because we spent all this time kind of doing the wrong thing. And so, we're really not at the milestones we would be at had we started from the beginning working on this.
Mm-hmm. Gagan, any thoughts on how you know when a pivot is working?
I think this is like the hardest part of being an entrepreneur. I mean, just as an example, when we started Maven, there were at least 5 or 6 companies that were in the same space with the same business idea. And today, we are the only one standing. Now, all of these companies still exist. They still have revenue, but they move to other markets. And so it will take another 5 or 10 years to know, well, were we right to stay in the marketplace for online learning market? Or were they right to move to SaaS for online learning? Or in the case of one of the companies, completely pivoting into AI products for product managers. And the reality is, like, I just think over time I'll say a few things. One, I've studied businesses a lot. I know a lot of the founding stories. I know a lot of what happens. I've gone to a lot of conferences like this, especially when I was early in my career. And so I start to build some sort of pattern matching or recognition for like what a story could look like. The second thing is that I like have my own impatience around success. Like, I want to be successful tomorrow. You know what I mean? And that like drives some level of urgency bias towards like doing something. And then third, I'd say that from my perspective, there is just a natural intuition of, does this feel right? Am I seeing the underlying signs of customers loving it, or the potential that they would love it if we did this, X, Y, and Z? Do I see a path to success? So I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's kind of some of the things that are going on in my head.
And a lot of it, too, is just execution. Like, I can not even tell you the graveyard of startups in the childcare space, and especially in the 9.5 years. A lot of them just didn't execute well on the exact same things we're doing. I just found out, like, there was a childcare startup that sold, and I was like, oh, wonderful, like, what did they sell for? Well, I think it was not a great acquisition, more like an acqui-hire, and I found out they didn't build a billing system to collect revenue. So it's like basic stuff that we invested a lot of time in our billing system. It's like back-end work. It's kind of not very sexy, but it works, we get paid right away. And so like sometimes it's just execution for the reason that other startups doing the exact same thing failed. And so like don't read too much into like the fact that someone has tried something before and not been successful.
And it's a fit thing. Like I've seen people who are really bad at executing one type of business and it just like seems like a clown show. And then they go and build another business and I'm like, wow, that person killed it. Like the same person can, and the same team even, can execute differently depending on whether or not the business is really a natural fit for their personality set and skill set. So I definitely think that's why the intuitive part of pivots is important, is like just this gut feeling of, am I happy with what I'm doing today? And like, does this have the chance of success? And so, yeah, I think that makes a big difference.
I think in one of our conversations you had mentioned that Winnie is profitable, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, congratulations.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that because it seems like profitability gives you optionality.
Yes.
As you think about the future of Winnie and where you want to go, and it almost seems like actually you have the potential for infinite pivot, so to speak, or extensions, however you want to describe it, because you're profitable. Can you talk about how you think about that?
Sort of. I mean, I think yes, in that I don't have to go out and raise, and sometimes the market's good, a lot of times it's not, and so being able to wait it out until you can get a good valuation is great. But the other way, like if you aren't raising money and you are just growing based on your profits, you can't really make mistakes. There's not someone else's cash to go invest in this new thing, and we're not highly profitable. We just achieved profitability in 2024. And so we have to be careful with the bets we make and what we try, which I think, can be limiting. So we're always trying to balance profitability is good because you're not on the clock necessarily, but at the same time, you may be missing an opportunity to really invest in something that would require a lot of capital. The good news is that these days, I think there's a lot that you can do that doesn't require a lot of capital. And so we've so far been okay with that sort of trade-off of just growing through our profits.
And digging into that a little bit more, can you talk about how you think about experimentation, just given that you have to balance like the budget and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, we right now are doing a lot of can we pre-sell it to a customer? Like we have all these customers now, like will they actually pay for the thing or say they're gonna pay for the thing or sign the contract, like some sign that it can make money if we do it. That's always a good way to know that you're kind of on the right track with what you're building. We also are doing a ton with AI now, which is really exciting. Like we're taking projects that we just completely killed because they were not scalable across 250,000 childcare providers, and now we can revisit them and put them on the roadmap, which is really exciting. So I think there's just a lot right now that we can do that wasn't possible even 5 years ago, even 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And Gagan, how do you think about experimentation relative to your runway or your budget?
Yeah, I mean, things have changed, at least in my world. In 2009, 2010, when I raised my first seed round, and all the way up until 2022, probably, my philosophy was always 24 months to the next round, and so I'd pretty much budget based on that. And with Maven, it's been 4 years since our Series A, and we have 6 years of runway. So we're not quite profitable, but we know that we can get to profitability without having to raise any additional capital. And that's sort of the path that I've been watching very closely. And so when it comes to cash management and taking bets, we're very thoughtful about, okay, if we take this bet, can we afford to take it over the next 6 to 12 months and not jeopardize our path to profitability? Luckily, like, we've grown, so as we continue to grow, the number of bets that we can make expands. So like, we grew, I don't know, over 2x last year, and as a result, we have essentially double the budget, right? That's not exactly right, because we want to get closer to profitability, not stay the same distance, but, and then we start to look at, okay, what are the bets we think are going to be the most effective at getting us to the next milestones of the business. But I'm very, very ROI conscious when making bets, but willing to do that over a 6 to 12 month period, not looking for the ROI, in the next month or two.
I'm going to open it up to questions in a moment. So I know that many of you have questions, so think on that. But my last question to you all is, if you were to kind of summarize your last, call it, decade of doing startups, various startups, and you think about all your learnings from pivots, like, what would you advise the audience who may be thinking about going through a pivot or not? Like, is there something that you could concisely wrap up with?
I think my thing is, the faster you can throw away the stuff that isn't working. I think I have always had a tendency to just add on, like, okay, let's add this new experiment, let's try this new feature. But killing things actually brings a lot of clarity and just really helps the team focus, helps you focus. And so just the more you can kill as you're trying new things, I think the faster you'll get to what's really, really working.
Yeah, your number one goal as a founder is to find a very, very narrow use case in which you can make some amount of money or progress. And then to have the vision that that use case is replicable or can move horizontally or vertically into a much bigger domain. And so personally, I think pivoting is all about asking yourself whether or not you think there's a good chance that your current efforts have the potential to meet that criteria. And only you can make that decision. I think one of my main points is, like, I don't think I can give you a sort of playbook that says this is the way that Unfortunately, like, if I did that, I'd kill off like 80% of companies because founders have to make their own calls on these things. They know better than we do.
Any questions? Yes, right here. And I think the mics are coming around.
Hirosha here. So my questions to Gagan. So you told that you are taking bets, right? So then that's for the next 12 months time, right? How much of, when you're taking those calculated bets, right, how much does it play with regards of gut feeling versus data? Because, I mean, one particular bet could really pay off, right, with regards of ROI, but where do you, bring the gut feeling into this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So before you're making the decision, well, first of all, I always do both. But I think there's like a really interesting post that I read once where someone said, like, the point of the best way to make decisions is not to look at the data and make the decision. It's to look at the data, both anecdotal and quantitative, right? Qualitative and quantitative. And then ask yourself the question of what you should do, and then make the decision. There's a second step in between that's really important. So I'm always looking at the data. I'm always looking at the qual feedback as well. But when I finally go to make the decision, I'm not trying to draw a direct line from the data to the decision. Because I find that it's very, very common that results in bad decision making. And so I trust myself a little bit more. And so I think actually all of my decisions are gut driven. And the only reason I look at data and information is to inform my gut, which then makes the call.
Love that.
Other questions? Yes, I think there's one back there. Sorry.
Hi, I was just wondering how both of you think about local maxima, like if you, either with your current business or a potential pivot where, you think, okay, there's customers that want this, but how big is this company really? And one of my mentors told me, you want to minimize the number of miracles between you and the sort of company you want to build. And I think sometimes you can get stuck in a situation where, okay, there's a small number of customers that like this, but it's going to take, 3 more miracles to reach a market big enough to make this a positive return for my investors or make it a company that I'm excited to work on or whatever it is. So I'm curious how both of you think about the local maxima problem for either staying in your current business or pivoting to a new business. Like, how does that play into your decision making?
Yeah, we get this a lot with childcare. I'm constantly told by investors, like, it's too niche. And I think that is like what they're getting at. Like, it is a limited market. Not everyone in the world has children, and then even fewer people have kids ages 0 to 5 that can find daycare and preschool. But now, like, we just launched K-12 and camps and after school care. And so we always saw that, like, if we can win childcare and really be known for that, it would make it so much easier to expand to these other areas. And I think investors will focus a lot on, like, no, it's too niche. But I think, like what Gagan was saying, if you can win even a niche thing, as long as it's not too niche. I was just talking to a founder who does, like, basically Winnie in a tiny market in the middle of Pennsylvania, and it's like, that's a little too niche. But as long as it's, can be a relatively reasonably sized business that you see the avenues for growth, I think it is okay to actually, like, niche down to really find your product market fit.
Hey, thank you. So I'm a founder pre-seed. We took an accelerator round. We're 2 years in. We know we need to pivot. So my question is about 2 years in, you've been, like, getting beat up a lot. So, and your team's been getting beat up a lot. So the question, like, I want to get at, like, the emotional texture. So, like, how do you keep your team motivated? How do you keep yourself motivated? And, when you're like, okay, I think this pivot's going to work, but that pivot also has a bunch of smart founders, and it's going to be, you're going to have to be able to kind of go in and just, fight to the death with that new market. So, yeah, that's my question. Yeah.
I'll jump in. I think a couple thoughts. One is that it doesn't always make sense to pivot. Sometimes it makes sense to quit and then start again. So there's nothing in your story that points one way or another, but I would just say that, like, if people are tired and they're not motivated to keep working, at the very least, you may need to cut off half the team, or you may need to, just completely dissolve the founding team and therefore, say goodbye to your existing capital structure. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. You ideally pivot because you already have an idea you're moving forward into. And so if you don't have an idea you're moving forward into, then you need to go back to ground zero and have, like, 1 or 2 people working on searching up for a new idea. I wouldn't do it with a larger team than 2, maybe 3 people. So that's one angle on that. The other angle I'll say is that I think that when you're at that early stage, your motivation will change immediately upon finding something that you're really excited about. And so, like, oftentimes people are losing motivation not because they're tired, but because they've just been losing for a very long period of time, and that sucks. No one likes that. So as soon as you move into winning, all of a sudden everything's going to change. It might take a month or 2, but, like, it's not going to take 6 months of winning for you to feel energized again, or your team to feel energized again. And so that's another way to think about this is, well, as soon as you can find a path to moving forward, then you'll move forward and it'll be fine, probably.
Over here.
Jacoby Stewart from Belty.io, and I really appreciate you all sharing, like, the pivot stories, because we all deal with, like, those shifts we have to make. I had a question about product market fit, and really, what are the indicators you look for amongst your customers? Like, because you may have some avid followers, and even, maybe friends and family, a big cohort of, students and things like that. But are there certain indicators where this is unbiased, untainted, good following, good feedback, and how do you kind of scale that?
So for us, when we pivoted into childcare, we didn't have a business model. We were just matching parents with childcare providers and not getting paid for it, and had this great free product. We knew we kind of had a lot more product market fit because we had so much more usage than ever before. But it wasn't until a big enterprise daycare that has thousands of centers across the United States came to us and said, like, we should start paying you. We should get a contract in place. You're sending us lots of families. We like that. That we realized, like, we had both a business model and, like, kind of true product market fit. Like, people were willing to pay for this thing because they didn't want it to go away. So that was a good sign. Like, when someone's really willing to pay you and sign a long-term agreement, like, that to me was like, okay, we're really going for this now.
So paying money.
Money talks.
Yeah, money, qualitative feedback, like people, almost every market you're in has some sort of benchmarks of what is considered good, right? So if you're a bank, you're going to compare yourself, or you're not a bank, but you're kind of a bank. I can say it. When you're kind of a bank, you compare yourself to other financial institutions, and if you're killing their metrics of retention and new user acquisition and stuff, you're doing well. Like, if you're in a marketplace like ours, like, you look at other marketplace businesses and you compare those metrics to those. And so I found that it's pretty easy, if you know your industry well that you're in, to find comparable data points and to build that sort of analogy, right, to another business, and then evaluate, how am I doing?
So we've talked a lot about things to learn from how people are responding to your business when you've been trying it on a certain cycle and all of that. But we've also had a lot of economic shifts in the last few years, both in terms of like what you need to show in order to maintain your investors and that kind of thing, but also in terms of like customer pressures and that kind of thing. I wonder if you have any takeaways, either in terms of ways that you've had to respond to that, or how that's changing plan for your ROI planning and that type of thing.
Yeah, childcare is influenced by the economy, and so, when people have great jobs and are making lots of money, they're more willing to purchase childcare, and when they're getting laid off, they may hold back from making a big childcare purchase. So we definitely see our, product and our revenue being influenced by market factors. But we've also found that, like, when you have a real business, it is relatively, like, immune to those broader economic shifts. So basically, we see in our data that, like, during a sort of down market, or when there's more layoffs and job uncertainty like we're in now, parents take longer to make a childcare purchase. They inquire more about price, like, they care about certain other things, but ultimately, like, we still grow and our metrics still go up because people need childcare all the time. Like, babies keep getting made. Thank you, Elon Musk, for doing your part. And so people need childcare. But like, so I would like personally advise people to pick an industry that is like relatively stable and not something that just exists when there's a pandemic, or just exists in these weird market conditions, because then you're always going to be fine throughout those kind of ups and downs.
Yeah, it's mostly noise, right? Like, you're a very small company. We have, tens of millions of dollars worth of transactions. The broader US GDP, I know the California GDP, anyways, is $2 trillion, right? So, or 2 or 4. And so, like, at the end of the day, we're just a very, 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 very small, irrelevant thing to the global economy. And so how much is it possible for global economic shifts, which are usually only 3 to 5%, right? We consider it a recession when we have 2 straight quarters of negative growth that could be negative 1%. And so what are the chances that's going to have any effect on my small little business and this small percentage of this big pie? It's very low. Like, I have rarely ever seen a situation where the macroeconomic factors, like the type of stuff you read in like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, has an effect on my business. I have very often seen that the VC landscape has an effect on my ability to raise money, but only my ability to raise money. So when my ability to raise money is affected, I will make sure that I have a different financial plan for the business, but that doesn't change everything else. I'm still going to go after a market that I think is growing, that I think is interesting, try to find product market fit and sell it, and not allow politics to convince me that there's that much of an effect of what's going on in that noise to like my actual day-to-day. And there are times where that's not true, by the way, but just like 98% of the time for startups, it really doesn't matter what the macro is.
All right, we are running out of time. So it sounds like the takeaways that I'm getting from this are, 1, get a pulse on your business as quickly as possible and make a decision on a new direction. Like, is this not working? Okay, we're going to experiment with something else. Try to pre-sell, do it cost effectively to get that new set of signals, et cetera. And your team will not really have a whole lot of psychological issues if you're finding something that is working because they already are feeling that this other thing is not working. I'm also hearing that your own psychology, you can kind of just get over that if you find something new that's working. And I think lastly, it sounds like VC world or like financial plans or things like that, VCs are good for fundraising, but like your direction is your gut feeling as a founder. You should do what's best for the business. No one knows the business better than you do, and you should go do that. And the macro conditions just really shouldn't matter if you're just focusing on your customers and sales. Is that a good
You were like
summary?
a real life granola AI.
Oh,
like,
great.
This is better than AI. This
Thank
is
you.
amazing.
I can get a job as granola AI. Yeah. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
And thank you, Gagan and
Thanks,
Sara.
Elizabeth.
Amazing.
Yeah.